everybody, and welcome to my presentation, and it is entitled, Can People Hack Nuclear Plants? Right, and again, as Lee was saying, my name is Gabriel Agboruche, and I'm just really excited to have this talk with you all. So let me go over what we'll be talking about. So I'll do a quick little introduction of myself, kind of some of my background. Lee almost had it as it concerns my role, right? The nuclear, cybersecurity, electrical type of person. So I'll break down a little bit more of what that is. Also go into what it was like working at a nuclear plant, which can be very interesting, something that you all might be interested in. But then I also needed to kind of take a step back and really ask a 14-year-old about cybersecurity to really kind of give me a baseline of my understanding of you guys' generation, primarily to see about your understanding of cybersecurity as a whole, see how I can build upon that. We'll go over a couple of widely publicized hacking activities. Then we'll get into some nuclear hacking, which involves like a little bit of a hacking simulation, attack simulation, and then I'll open it up for questions. All right, let's go next. So again, with the introduction, my name is Gabriel Agboruche, and I work as a senior consultant with Mandiant FireEye. And this whole senior consultant thing, right, it's very fancy titles and everything, but really what it is that companies employ my organization to put me into action in the event that their company have hacks, things where they might have been hacked by a nation state organization. They'll bring me or some of my colleagues and peers in to be able to respond to it. We are also in proactive type of services where we can do some offensive security and pen testing to test organizations' defenses. And that's a lot of what I do in my current role with Mandiant FireEye. And also I have there at the bottom left, I work with and volunteer for an organization called the Michigan Cyber Civilian Corps. And we work as volunteer civilians who are cybersecurity professionals. And what we do is that we respond to Michigan's, or we work with law enforcement and the Michigan state entities to be able to respond to cybersecurity incidents. So we pretty much work as cybersecurity mercenaries. So if there's some issues and they need some additional hands on the keyboard or some help, we are there as those professionals in order to help out the state of Michigan with those issues. And Stuxnet changed my life, but hold that because we're going to talk about that a little bit later in the conversation. You might see a little logo in the middle. It's called the OT Wolfpack there at the bottom. I'm also a part of that organization, which started with Mandiant FireEye. And our leader or the organizer's name is Chris Sistrunk. He started it off where pretty much a lot of us OT and ICS, which stands for Operational Technology for OT, and ICS is Industrial Control System, cybersecurity professionals, we came together to kind of join this organization. And I think more is going to be coming within 2020 or 2021. And on the right, shameless plug, those are my socials. Follow me on Twitter under ICS_Gabe. And also have a small podcast called ICS with Gabe, and that's on Apple Podcasts. So that's who I am. Oh, also want to talk about a little bit of my background. So I did go to school. I got my bachelor's in electrical engineering, and I majored in power systems, right? Power systems, electrical engineering. So that's all your substations, all your electrical distribution and all that type of stuff. But since I went into industry, I transitioned into that of nuclear. And that's why you guys are seeing these pictures here, right? You see Homer Simpson to the top left reading about nuclear reactor safety when he should already know that. He's typically not very responsible in the show in The Simpsons. And on the right, you see that is the Springfield nuclear plant. So I transitioned from more automotive electrical engineering into that of nuclear. INC, instrumentation and control. So when I worked at the nuclear plant, a lot of what I did was be responsible for those digital devices within a nuclear plant. And we'll get a little bit more into that as we go forward, but that's a lot of who I am, the work that I do, and some of my background. So getting into that, right, you guys saw on the previous slide, you saw the Springfield nuclear plant. But I don't know if you guys knew that there's nuclear plants pretty much surrounding the whole of the United States and the whole world, but we're just going to zoom in the United States right now. So as you see, there's not a lot in some of those desperate or those desolate more areas, those inland areas. You see a lot of them along the coast. And if you see a little red arrow, that's the one that I worked at. I worked at the Enrico Fermi 2 nuclear plant, and it's what you call a BWR, a boiling water reactor. And that's a little bit south of Detroit, Michigan, and which is where I'm originally from. And now we're getting into what is it like working at a nuclear plant. And I did want to do something. I wanted to show you guys something that I used to get from some of my classes. And I'm going to do this. I'm going to stop sharing for 1 second. If I can touch Zoom. Yes. How do you stop sharing for 1 second? And then I want to take and turn off my background. Oops. My virtual background, so that I am able to show you guys this. So this is what is called a boiling water reactor. And hopefully you guys are able to see the majority of it. One thing that I saw when I first viewed this in some of my nuclear engineering classes at the Fermi 2 nuclear plant was that there are so many different components to a nuclear plant environment. So you see some pictures and some things here. I'm not going to get into a whole bunch of depth into it, but I did want to show you how technical this type of environment is. You have a lot of pumps, you have a lot of tubing. This right here is what you call the reactor core, where all of the magic happens. But I just wanted to show you a quick view of what it looks like from a diagram at a nuclear plant. And this one is what you call a boiling water reactor. Okay, now let me get my everything else back. Okay, cybercamp. Let me share my screen. And Lee, are you seeing my screen again?
I am.
Okay, awesome. So I kind of wanted to show you guys that because that was something that was very, very integral to the day-to-day life working at a nuclear plant. There were so many different components to the plant, whether it's pumps, whether it's sensors, whether it's fuel control, whether it's updates, whether it's safety. All of those things kind of combine to the whole plant experience. And I think that one thing that I want you guys to notice about the plants is, or actually the locations of the plants, is that the majority of them are very close to bodies of water. Majority of them are very close to bodies of water or almost right there on top of bodies of water. And I wanted to explain a small concept of that. And it comes from the NRC, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, Reg Guide 1.7 as it concerns the background. And it's a concept called the ultimate heat sink, right? You guys can read that if you want. It can, if you don't have a background in it, it can be confusing, but it pretty much is saying that the ultimate heat sink is something that's required for commercial nuclear plants in the United States. And what it is that it is pretty much a requirement for these nuclear plants to be built and structured around large bodies of water because it helps in the safety of the plant. Because if you look at nuclear energy, what happens is that professionals, they bring in what you call fuel, nuclear fuel, which is uranium-235, which is an isotope. It's a uranium isotope, which doesn't always exist within the environment or within nature. So what happens with this is that this uranium-235 is brought in and bundled together. And what happens is that it's put under some water, and then a process happens called fission, which is just breaking up of those uranium atoms. It breaks up, and it releases a whole bunch of energy. And that energy boils water. That water boils and boils and boils, and it creates high pressured steam, which is converted into electricity. where if you live anywhere by a nuclear plant, you are probably getting some electricity from that breaking up of those atoms. And this ultimate heat sink, the reason why it needs to be by water is because that breaking up of those atoms causes a lot of heat to be generated. So much heat that it boils water, but it also heats up all of the areas around it. So water is continually circulating throughout the nuclear plant in order to keep things cool so things don't blow up or explode or bad things happen or a radioactive release into the atmosphere. So that's why I wanted to kind of bring that up to you. Working at a nuclear plant, safety is a big concern, right? So there's all these subsystems and devices and things that work together in order to keep people safe, but also generate electricity. So I just want to bring that up there. And you guys can research that if you want. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission, Regulatory Guide 1.7, and that's in the background section, if you want. Okay, now I want to get into the section called Ask a 14-Year-Old, because I don't talk to 14-year-olds on a daily basis within my work environment, but I do want to be able to have a better understanding of my audience, which is you guys. So on the left there, that's me and my nephew and my nephew's cousin. It's pretty much my niece, but that's my nephew with the red arrow. I don't know if you guys see, but I really like using these red arrows. He might be listening. I told him to tune in and to register, so hopefully he's listening. But that's him on the left, and you see he's just right there tucked under my arm. We just got done doing a 5K in downtown Detroit around Thanksgiving. And on the right, so on the left, he's probably about 7 or 8 years old. And on the right, he's 14. This is this past summer, and he does not look like a little guy anymore. He's no longer tuckable. I can't, put my arm around. I had to reach my arm up and everything now. But I asked him a series of questions. And these are the 3 questions that I asked him. I asked him, how would you define hacking? Would you consider a hacker or hackers to be a positive or a negative person? And what can be hacked? And give some examples. Because I really wanted to gain a better understanding of his understanding and you guys' understanding. So his first answer was, hacking is breaking something or breaking into something that was running perfectly fine before. And I thought that was a really good definition, because he typically is engaging with video games and social media. And I think you guys are always hearing of social media platforms or people's accounts always being hacked or broken into, or sometimes games where people, I think in one of the previous presentations, we're speaking about Minecraft, where you can go in there and that you can modify things and develop things. So, but at times it can cause things to mess up and break. So that's what he defined hacking as. The second question is, would he consider hackers negative or positive people? And he said negative. But I think that, as you saw in the previous presentation, the gentleman, his name escapes me right now, but he spoke of having a career in cybersecurity, right? So I think that a lot of times what's highly publicized, what's put out there to the world, is that hackers are bad people. But as the gentleman explained in the previous presentation, hackers can be good people too. Hackers can work to verify defenses within organizations or systems to make sure that these things aren't taken advantage of by negative people. But he said he thought it was negative, so I just took his answer as it was. And I asked him what can be hacked and give some examples. He says anything digital can be hacked. And that kind of wowed me, right? Because I don't think all of, I guess, people who are in charge of organizations, people who are professionals and more adults, we don't always have this perspective that anything can be hacked. Sometimes you might see people putting things out about their products that say we have the unhackable thing, or I don't know if you guys remember the Titanic was like the unsinkable ship, but we saw that it sunk. So I think that my nephew, this 14-year-old, having this perspective that anything can be hacked is just a really good foundation and baseline to say that, hey, anything can be compromised and anything can be hacked. And the examples that he gave were video games, computers, phones, and et cetera, which are very common digital devices for today. So that was the 14-year-old's perspective. My mind is in the right place. So I'm like, okay, cool, I can move forward. So I wanted to start off with just saying some of the widely publicized hacks, right? As you see in the top right, you see that you have a little male icon. Typically, that's a very common way that people get into systems, or hackers, negative hackers, get into systems. And then from that email, they compromise a computer, which is the second one. And then they can get into larger infrastructure like servers, right? Things that control organizations and have business needs within them. But kind of sticking with the theme of what my nephew was speaking about, as it concerns social media, just earlier this year in September, and this is a very good website to get some of your hacking information from. It speaks about, the title is How Twitter Survived Its Biggest Hack and Plans to Stop the Next One. And it turned out that this hack was accomplished by a group of individuals, but there were some people who were teenagers that were actually responsible for some of this activity. Look at the next article title. It says, "The Young and the Reckless, a gang of teenagers or teen hackers snatched the keys to Microsoft's video game empire. Then they went too far." There was a time where some years ago, it was found out that some teens that got inside the internal Microsoft for Xbox, their developer environment. They were changing all types of things, getting access to video games early. I know the Xbox X series and all that had recently come out, but they had got access into the developer environment, the place where nobody is really supposed to be unless you're developing that type of technology. So I think the thing that I walked away with is that teens are involved in the negative aspects of hacking, right? We can see these from these very two widely publicized hacks. But I think that it's great that SANS is having a cyber camp, because it can show, and it does show, that, hey, you guys are teens too, but you guys can be involved in the positive aspects, right? Learning more and more about hacking, learning more and more about defenses. And I just highly encourage everybody that as you see these news articles, you see that teens can be involved in the negative. I think that you guys are teens that can be involved in the positive. So that's what I wanted to walk away from this particular idea. But let's get into nuclear hacking. Nuclear hacking, the whole, that's why you came to this presentation. And the question is, can people hack nuclear plants or nuclear facilities? And I would say that it has happened. That's the first thing I want to say. It has happened. And it happened sometime, or it was exposed some time ago, probably around 2010, when a virus or a worm called Stuxnet happened. So Stuxnet, so I would like to first say is that happened in the Middle East, right? So Stuxnet is pretty much a worm or a malicious code or malicious program that was thought of to be had put on a USB drive and put into an Iranian nuclear facility. And as a result, it caused what you call these things called centrifuges. And these things spin, and they work to enrich some of those uranium or plutonium elements. So these centrifuges spun as a result of these systems, the digital systems, being infected by Stuxnet. And what it did is that it caused these things to be destroyed. So they had to keep replacing centrifuges. And it turned out that there were some external actors that were involved. And I would highly encourage you guys to read up more and more about it. You guys can just Google Stuxnet, but I don't want to get into all the intricate details. There's a book called Countdown to Zero Day that goes into a lot of detail about it. But I bring that up to say, before you saw me with that hashtag Stuxnet changed my life, because before that, I was working as a nuclear INC engineer at a plant right outside of Detroit until that happened around 2010 or so. And I went from more of that engineering side to getting involved in cybersecurity. So that's another thing that I want to bring up. I think earlier people were talking about career changes and career changers. I was there in electrical engineering and nuclear engineering. I was involved in all of these processes at an actual plant. And Stuxnet happened, and then it changed all of what I did, where now I'm working in that capacity as a security consultant, helping organizations all around the world with their industrial cybersecurity needs. So that's nuclear nuclear hacking, which has already happened. Stuxnet, Google it, and it changed my career and it changed my life. So here, I want to do just a small type of attack vector simulation. Okay, so I think that we were talking about before about these nuclear facilities and how I showed you guys on that diagram that there's all these systems, all these intricate subsystems that work together in order to generate electricity and to keep that environment safe. But what happens is that you have very large equipment in those areas, very large equipment like generators, like huge generators, or you might have transformers. These are huge devices which are made by some industrial manufacturers. You might have an ABB or a General Electric or a Siemens. So there's times where, and this happens all the time, you have these very large equipment that might be malfunctioning a bit. So you might need to call Siemens or you might need to call ABB and say, hey, we need you guys to come out here and service our device. So you have what you call, start off to the left, to the top left, you have a plant vendor, right? So this vendor is coming out to service that particular device. So they're coming into the plant and they're there to service it, but you don't know all the background. And this is an attack simulation, not saying that this happens all the time or anything, but we're just gonna simulate a way that somebody can compromise a nuclear plant network. So that vendor can go from a good vendor to a bad one, because we don't really know who this vendor is. We might not have done a whole bunch of interaction with this company before, but they might be servicing our plant environment. So then what they typically would do, especially if it's a digital device, that's what you call network connected. They'll connect to some type of network switch in order to try to service that. But then they might see that, hey, this network switch, on the other side of it, there's something what you call a firewall. I know you guys have heard that. What firewalls intend to do is that they intend to block bad stuff from going in and going out of certain environments. So here we have a firewall between that negative vendor, because they went red, right? We saw them good, but then they went bad. So that negative vendor or that hacker is like, well, I can't get in through the firewall. So then we see that they might introduce something like a USB into the environment. And so all these things here within the plant, these are just a lot of times computers. You might have a Windows 10 computer, a Windows 8 computer, maybe a Windows 7 computer in this environment. So this plant vendor is like, I can't get in through the firewall entrance, but so I'm gonna try to use a USB drive that, as you saw, it has something green on it. It has a virus on it, right? And then they plug into one of those devices, or a worm, right? A virus or a worm. And worm tends to jump from device to device to device to device. And that's what's happening here. It goes to that one computer system. It goes to this other one, some type of application server device. It goes to this laptop that's also connected to the internal system. And it goes to other systems and other systems and other systems. And then eventually it compromises everything here, right? And then now this plant vendor it's pretty much owned, right? So that's an attack simulation that is possible. It can happen. So I just wanted to bring this up to really give you guys an idea of how this would occur in a real world environment. But I don't want to leave you there with saying that, hey, all of our nuclear plants can be hacked or anything, but I do want to provide some things that we do as defenders to help defend against some of these type of attacks. So let's start off to the top left in the scanning idea. So as you guys saw, you saw that USB drive had that virus on it that was able to attack that whole environment. So not only can it be a USB drive, but it can also be a vendor laptop, or I don't know if you guys have seen those before, those CD drives. So that CD drive can go into that plant environment. But before it gets there, one thing that I think is very important, and one thing that we do all the time, we scan these devices. We scan these devices for anything negative, anything known as bad, before they're able to interact with any of the plant systems within the environment. So that's one thing that we do to help to protect. Another one is patching, right? So even if one of those negative or those viruses get inside of the plant environment, get inside that plant network, if those systems, if that Windows 8 device is fully patched, there are some vulnerabilities that virus might not be able to exploit. So patching those devices is very important. That's something that you should do on your home computers too, which is extremely important. So that's another thing that we do in order to defend. But also there's a big aspect within industrial control system cybersecurity as it concerns physical security. So not only do you want to secure those digital devices, but you also want to secure the environments where those devices are. So if you guys have ever been to a nuclear plant in the United States, you'll see a lot of physical security there. One thing that I had to do every morning before I went into certain areas in the plant, I would have to use what you call biometrics. That's that green thing that you see, where I would actually have to get some type of scan of my hand to prove that it was me before I gain access into that environment. So as I said before, with the vendor tried to get into an area where there was a network switch, but if he couldn't get there, he got into a different part of the plant. With the biometrics stopped you from even going forward. So as you see with that door with that lock on it, you can't even get past the door if you aren't a certain individual. So physical security is just as important as cybersecurity or digital security within the plant environment. So that's another thing that we do. And not only that, you see there on the right, you see network segmentation. So we might have a lot of devices, right? A lot of digital devices. We might have printers, we might have laptops, we have workstations, we might have things called HMIs or human machine interfaces. They're all there in the plant. But one thing that we do is that we separate them based upon function. And only certain devices are able to talk to other devices that are in certain boxes or subsections. So say, for instance, a virus gets into, say, for instance, the printer network segment. They might not be able to get into they shouldn't be able to get into the Reactor core digital device subsection. So if you separate your network into certain areas and only allow access from one area to another area based upon a need or necessity, that's another way to stop bad guys from further penetrating your defenses. So these are 4 things that we do. We do scanning, we do patching, we do physical security, and network segmentation. All of those are very important to defend against defending against your nuclear plants and your other industrial environments from getting compromised. And with that said, I want to thank you all for your time and ask if there are any questions.
Thank you very much, Gabriel. That was really a fun talk. Thank you.
Indeed.
So there was an interesting question which came up that I wanted to ask you about, because you made that transition from the engineering side to the security side.
Yep.
What kind of advice can you give to people who may be who may be looking to transition or something from that engineering type role to security?
Okay. I think that, so as I went to school, one thing that we learned was a whole bunch of theory in electrical engineering. Theory, math, as it concerns physics and calculus and circuit theory, specifically for electrical engineering. And as I was going into cybersecurity, I recognized that I needed to learn more, right? So we might be able to come to certain stances in our careers or in our minds where we're saying, I've learned all of this stuff, and this stuff isn't necessarily this new stuff. And I think one thing that was necessary for me to transition was for my mind to be open to learning more and learning different things. And just starting from the beginning. I think, as you guys know, like going from middle school to high school, there was a learning curve that happened there. And that'll happen too as you go from high school to college. You kind of have to start all over again. So going from a senior in high school to a freshman in college, I had to go from a senior in electrical engineering to a freshman in cybersecurity. And I think that that's probably one of the major things that was really beneficial to me. I had to go back to freshman status. And that was okay, because I was able to build up that knowledge and go from there.
Okay, awesome. There was an interesting question too. Is that do the regions where the where nuclear power plants exist, does that change the difficulty of those being protected, or from the attacking side being exploited? So nuclear power plants here in the US, I guess you would make the assumption that they're better protected than those that might be set up in more developing countries. Is that true, or is that a bit of a misnomer?
Absolutely. I think that, so the United States, we have certain regulatory guidance that comes from the government. So it starts off from the NRC, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, but there's other industries called INPO, Industry for Nuclear Power Operators, and also NEI, Nuclear Energy Institute. All these organizations put forth standards and guidance. There's even conferences. In other parts of the world, a lot of that is lacking. I know I've worked with customers, nuclear organizations in China, when I was contracting for other organizations, and they just didn't have the same standards. A lot of times we would ask the particular organization saying like, hey, we want to implement this and this and this and this. And they would say, well, is that required? And we would say, well, it's recommended. And they would say, oh, if it's not required and if it's going to stop the development of this project, then we can just do that later. So here in the US, we have some regulatory guidance that pushes a lot of our cybersecurity implementation, but in other parts of the world, not so much.
Okay, thanks. And then just because we're just about out of time here, how scared should we be?
You shouldn't be scared. You shouldn't be scared because you are in the hands of cybersecurity professionals like us, right? Like me, like the individuals who are on this call. I think that is growing as it concerns the expertise and the mindset towards securing all these different environments. So I wouldn't say be scared, but also don't think that, just like my nephew said, anything can be hacked. I think we've seen this with several hacks that just happened here at the end of the year, right? Anything can be hacked. It's just the way that we respond to those incidents is the important thing for us, right? So I wouldn't say to be scared, because especially in nuclear, there's all these redundant systems. So say, for instance, one thing goes down, another system will just come right back up. And we also have these things called safety systems within there. So I think that fear shouldn't be there, because the cybersecurity professionals, we're working hard day after day, after night. And there's also a lot of safety systems within those nuclear environments to help keep people safe. That's how I would say it.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Gabriel. That was awesome.
Indeed. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, really appreciate you taking your time to spend with us today.
Absolutely. And those are the contact information and all that. DMs are open. And again, follow me on Twitter, ICS with Gabe, or ICS Gabe.